The final war begins. The sky was dark. Not because of clouds, but because of smoke. Earth had become a battlefield. Buildings were broken. The oceans were black. The trees were gone. The alien race called Setheri had attacked Earth 5 years ago. They were tall, cold, and had no eyes. They spoke with their minds, and they hated emotions. Now, only one human base was left. It floated in the air, hidden behind clouds. People called it Skyhold. Inside Skyhold, everyone was afraid. Young soldiers ran down the halls. Lights blinked red. Sirens screamed. In the center room, a group of generals stood around a glowing map. It showed red dots, Setheri ships, all moving toward Earth's last home. General Merrick slammed his hand on the table. "We don't have time," he said. "We use the arrow now." A boy stood behind him. He was only 20. His name was Ryan Cade. He was not the strongest, not the fastest, but he had something the others didn't. Hope. "You called for me, sir?" Ryan asked. General Merrick turned to him and nodded slowly. "Yes, Ryan. It's time. You are the one who will carry it." Ryan's heart pounded. He had trained for this. He had heard the stories. But now, it was real. They walked down a long metal hallway, deep into the base. At the end was a door with a strange symbol on it. Not human. Alien. The general placed his hand on the scanner. The door opened. Inside was a small glass case, and floating inside it was a glowing weapon. A silver arrow. Smooth. Perfect. Pulsing with light. The last arrow. Ryan took a step forward. But before he could reach it, someone else entered the room. She wore dark blue armor. Her skin was pale gold. Her eyes were sharp like stars. Her name was Sarah. She was not human. Not fully. Sarah had been found as a baby in a crashed Setheri pod. A human scientist raised her in secret. She had powers the humans didn't understand. She could read thoughts. She could feel things others couldn't. But she had chosen to fight for humans. The general nodded to her. "Sarah," he said, "are you sure you want to do this?" She looked at Ryan. Her voice was calm but strong. "It's not mine anymore," she said. "It belongs to him now." Ryan stepped closer to her. "I don't understand. Why me?" She looked deep into his eyes. "Because you still believe," she said. "This arrow is not just metal. It holds memory, emotion, life. Only someone with a strong heart can use it." Ryan reached out and touched the glass. It opened. The arrow floated into his hand. It felt warm, alive. He turned to Sarah. "Why can't you fire it?" She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "Because it will need a choice. A choice I can't make." Ryan didn't understand, but he nodded. Outside, a voice came over the speakers. "Setheri fleet approaching. All units to battle stations." General Merrick gave the final order. "Ryan, you will fly alone. The enemy can't see you. You must reach their mothership. When you find their queen, fire the arrow." Ryan nodded. His legs were shaking, but he didn't show it. As he walked to his ship, Sarah followed him. At the door, she stopped him. She placed her hand on his chest. "If you miss," she said softly, "we all die." Ryan looked at her. "I won't miss," he said. The door closed. The ship launched into the sky. Below him, Earth burned. Above him, the stars watched in silence. In his hand, the arrow glowed brighter. Inside the Setheri mothership, alarms began to sound. They had detected him. The war was not over. Not yet. A weapon made of memories. The stars moved slowly outside the glass window of the small ship. Ryan sat alone in the pilot's seat, his hands trembling around the controls. The last arrow lay across his lap, still glowing faintly. It felt heavier now, like it was watching him, like it knew something. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words. "It will need a choice I can't make." Why couldn't she make it? Why did it have to be him? He didn't have answers. Only fear. He looked at the arrow again. It wasn't like any weapon he had ever seen. It wasn't metal. Not really. It looked silver, but when the light hit it, it shimmered with strange colors, like water, like stars, like memories. And somehow it pulsed, like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the ship shook. A warning light flashed. Object detected. Hostile scanner approaching. Ryan grabbed the controls, trying to steer away. But it was too late. A blue beam shot through space, grabbing his ship like a claw. "No, no," he shouted. The ship froze in place, trapped by an alien force. Slowly it began to move, not by Ryan's hand, but by something stronger. It was being pulled into the belly of the Setheri mothership. Meanwhile, back on Skyhold, far away, Sarah stood alone in the chamber where the arrow once floated. She placed her hand on the glass. It was empty now. Cold. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she could feel Ryan. She didn't need a screen. Her thoughts stretched across the sky like wind. That was one of her gifts, a gift she never asked for, but one she couldn't live without. She felt his fear, his confusion, and then his capture. She opened her eyes, breathing hard. They had taken him. She turned sharply and walked down the corridor, past soldiers who whispered as she passed. Some still didn't trust her. She wasn't human. She looked like them, yes, but her blood was different. Her mind was different. But she had chosen this side, and now she had to act. She went to a secret room at the far edge of Skyhold, a place only she and one other person knew. Inside was a large metal box. She opened it. Old papers, drawings, data chips. At the very bottom, an old photograph. It showed a human scientist, a kind-looking man with silver hair and warm eyes. He was smiling, holding a small alien baby wrapped in a blanket. That baby was her. Sarah sat down. Her hand shook as she picked up one of the pages. It was filled with notes, and one word, written over and over again. Sympathy, emotion, connection. She remembered the words the scientist once told her when she was just a child. They don't understand feelings, Sarah. That's their weakness. Not hate, but emptiness. The arrow wasn't made to destroy. It was made to share, to show the Setheri what it means to be human. Love, grief, joy, pain, laughter, sorrow. But there was a cost. To fire the arrow, it had to be filled first. Not with fuel, but with memory. One memory strong enough to shake a world. And that's why Sarah couldn't fire it. Because her most powerful memory was him. The scientist, her father. And she wasn't ready to let it go. Back on the mothership, Ryan was dragged into a prison cell made of glass and light. He slammed his fist against the wall, but it didn't move. The arrow had been taken from him and locked inside a separate chamber. Outside the cell, a tall figure appeared. The creature had a smooth, dark body. No face, no eyes. But Ryan felt it watching him. A voice entered his head. Cold, sharp. You are the one carrying the memory weapon. Ryan backed up. What do you want? We do not fear your tools. We fear your emotions. We seek the girl. Ryan froze. Sarah. She is the mistake, a blend of two kinds. She carries danger inside her. We must erase her. Ryan clenched his fists. You'll never find her. The alien paused. We already have. The cell flickered. Ryan screamed. No. He had to get out. He had to warn her. Suddenly, he heard a whisper. It wasn't in his head. It was inside his heart. Ryan. It was Sarah. I'm coming for you. Somewhere hidden on the mothership, in a dark room full of shadows, an old prisoner sat alone. His hands were scared, his hair was white, and his eyes were tired. He felt the arrow arrive the moment it entered the ship. He had built it, long ago, with his own hands. He whispered into the silence, "It has begun." Back on Skyhold, the generals prepared to launch their final defense. But Sarah was already gone. She had taken a small ship, one that didn't show on any radar. It was old, built by the man who raised her. She flew alone into enemy skies. She didn't need orders. She didn't need backup. She just needed to find him and finish what they started. Prisoners and traitors. Ryan lay still on the floor of the glass cell. His muscles ached and his head throbbed. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. It could have been hours or maybe days. The glow of the ship's cold, unnatural light never changed. There were no windows, no sense of time, just the steady hum of the Xetheri's living technology all around him. He tried to think of a way out, but the walls were too smooth, too solid. Every time he touched them, a faint ripple would push back, almost as if the cell itself were alive. The arrow was gone. He had seen them take it down a long, silent hallway. He had fought to hold on to it, but the guards were stronger, faster. The weapon was locked away somewhere deep in the ship, far out of his reach. "You will tell us where the girl is," the alien voice had said. "You will tell us how she can be found." But Ryan didn't answer. He had sworn to protect Sarah, even if it meant he might not leave this place alive. A stranger in the shadows. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. Ryan sat up quickly, his heart pounding. Outside the cell, a figure emerged from the shadows. For a moment, Ryan thought it was another Xetheri, but then he saw the man's face. A human face, lined with age and marked by scars. The man wore ragged clothes, his hair was thin and white, and his eyes carried a heavy sadness. "You're not one of them," Ryan said, his voice hoarse. The old man didn't respond right away. He stood in front of the cell, staring at Ryan as if seeing a ghost. "I thought they had killed all of us," Ryan continued, trying to sit up straighter. "Who are you?" At last, the man spoke. His voice was rough, quiet. "A mistake." "What do you mean?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, thin device. He held it up, and the light in the cell flickered. Ryan felt the strange energy around him weaken, just slightly. The man looked around, then motioned for Ryan to keep quiet. "They can hear us," he said, "but not for long. Listen carefully." Ryan leaned closer, his body tense. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, then finally said, "I worked on the arrow." Ryan's heart nearly stopped. "What? You made it?" The man nodded slowly. "Years ago, when the war started, we thought we could end it quickly. We thought that Xetheri would understand, once they felt what we felt. But they didn't." Ryan stared at him, stunned. "You mean, the arrow isn't a weapon?" "It's not a weapon the way you think," the man replied. "It's a mirror. It shows them what we are, everything we are, all at once." "Why would you create something like that?" Ryan asked, his voice shaking. "Because we had no choice," the man said. "The Xetheri have no emotions. They don't feel pain, love, fear, or joy. They only consume. They only destroy. We thought that if we could show them what it meant to be human, they might stop." Ryan shook his head. "But it didn't work." "No," the man admitted. "It didn't. They saw what we were, and they hated it." A new plan. Before Ryan could ask more questions, the sound of footsteps echoed again. The old man quickly turned off his device, and the cell's light returned to its usual glow. He slipped back into the shadows, leaving Ryan alone once more. A group of Xetheri guards approached. They opened the cell and pulled Ryan to his feet. He didn't resist this time. He let them drag him down the long, curved corridor. The walls glowed faintly, pulsing like veins in a living creature. They brought him to a different room, one larger than his cell. In the center was a metal platform surrounded by strange, twisting devices. Standing there was another Xetheri figure, taller, more imposing than the others. "You carry the arrow's memories," the voice said directly into Ryan's mind. "We will take them from you." Ryan clenched his jaw. He wasn't sure what they meant, but he knew he couldn't let them have the arrow's secrets. He thought of Sarah, of her voice, her face. He thought of the words she had said before he left. "If you miss, we all die." But there was no way to fight. He was unarmed, helpless. As the Xetheri moved closer, Ryan noticed something odd. One of the guards standing near the doorway wasn't like the others. Its posture was different. Its movements were slower, more deliberate, and when it turned slightly, he saw a faint, human-like expression on its face. It wasn't Xetheri at all. It was Sarah, traitors among them. She had somehow disguised herself, hidden in plain sight among the enemy. Ryan's heart leaped with hope, but he didn't dare call out to her. He didn't dare give her away. As the tall Xetheri leaned closer, ready to begin whatever process it intended, Sarah struck. With a swift motion, she pulled a small device from her armor and fired a blast of light at the nearest guard. The room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared. Ryan stumbled backward as the other guards lunged at Sarah. She moved quickly, her alien strength and speed making her a blur of motion. In a matter of seconds, she had taken down the guards and was at Ryan's side. She grabbed his arm and pushed something into his hand. "The arrow," she whispered. "I got it back." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "How did you?" "No time," she said. "We need to go." They ran. Through the twisting corridors, past doors that hissed open and shut. The alarms grew louder. The ship shuddered as though it was alive and angry. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they couldn't stop. As they turned a corner, they nearly collided with someone. Ryan froze. It was the old man. "You?" Ryan gasped. "I told you, we have no choice," the man said. "You can't do this alone. You'll need me." The truth revealed. Ryan and Sarah exchanged a glance. They didn't have time to argue. The Xetheri were closing in. Together, the three of them continued deeper into the ship, following the old man's lead. He led them to a hidden chamber, one that looked different from the rest of the ship. It was dark and quiet, filled with strange, glowing patterns on the walls. "What is this place?" Ryan asked. The man turned to face them, his eyes serious. "This is where it all began," he said, "and where it must end. The sky falls." Skyhold was falling apart. The once quiet refuge for humanity's last survivors was now a scene of chaos. Alarms blared in every corridor. The halls, which had stood for years as a symbol of defiance against the Xetheri, were now filled with smoke and panic shouts. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. Engineers frantically tried to repair failing systems. Civilians huddled together in whatever safe spaces they could find, whispering prayers that might not be answered. General Merrick stood in the command room, gripping the edge of the central table. The holographic map above him showed a mass of red dots moving toward the station. Enemy ships surrounded them like a pack of wolves closing in for the kill. "Status report," Merrick barked. His voice was rough, but there was no panic in it. Not yet. A young officer stumbled forward. "Sir, the Xetheri are breaching our outer defenses. We've lost half the shield generators. Weapon systems are at 30% power, and we've lost contact with Hangar C." Merrick cursed under his breath. "Get me a line to our remaining fighters. I want every available ship in the air. We'll hold them off as long as we can." Another officer turned toward him. "What about the arrow, sir? Should we recall Ryan and Sarah?" Merrick's jaw tightened. "No. They're our only chance. If we don't hold the Xetheri here, they'll have no cover to finish the mission." But as he said the words, he couldn't help but glance at the crumbling display. They didn't have much time left. Sarah's desperate move. Far away from Skyhold, deep inside the Cethary mothership, Sarah and Ryan moved quickly through a maze of twisting corridors. The ship felt alive, its walls pulsing faintly with light and heat. Every turn brought them closer to the core, where the Cethary Queen waited. But they weren't alone. Sarah could feel the presence of their pursuers. The Cethary were silent and fast. They didn't need words. They didn't make a sound. But Sarah's unique senses picked up their approach, like a dark wave closing in behind them. She gritted her teeth and pulled Ryan forward. "Keep moving," she said. "We're almost there." Ryan was breathing hard, his grip tight on the last arrow. "How do you know?" "These halls all look the same." Sarah stopped suddenly and pressed a hand to the wall. Her pale gold skin shimmered faintly in the ship's dim light. "Because I can feel it," she whispered. "The core is close. I can feel its pull." But that pull was getting stronger, more painful. Sarah stumbled slightly, and Ryan caught her arm. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her face was pale. "I'm fine. Let's go." They didn't have time to argue. Behind them, a faint hum grew louder. The Cethary were closing in. The battle for Skyhold. Back on Skyhold, the battle had reached a fever pitch. Fighter ships weaved through the air outside the station, dodging bright, deadly beams from the Cethary fleet. Explosions lit up the sky, casting brief flashes of light through Skyhold's smoky corridors. Soldiers fired their weapons from makeshift barricades, desperately trying to hold back enemy boarding parties. One of the station's main support beams groaned loudly. Engineers scrambled to stabilize it, but a powerful blast from a nearby Cethary ship sent it crashing down. The entire structure shuddered. "General," an officer shouted, "we've lost the East Wing." Merrick slammed his fist onto the table. "Evacuate the survivors to the central tower. Get them out of there now." But even as he gave the orders, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Cethary were relentless. They weren't just attacking to win. They were attacking to destroy, to erase. Merrick could see it in the way they fought, the way they targeted civilians as much as soldiers. They wanted Skyhold wiped from existence. A nearby monitor flashed red. "Incoming enemy vessel. Large signature." Merrick turned to see a massive Cethary warship descending toward the station. It wasn't firing. Instead, it released a pulse of blue light that washed over the station's surface. Communications went dead. Weapons systems froze. Merrick realized what they were doing. "They're trying to cripple us completely," he said. "Prepare for." Before he could finish, another explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered, and the holographic map went dark. Skyhold was dying. The core. Inside the Cethary mothership, Sarah and Ryan finally reached a massive, glowing chamber. The walls shimmered with a strange, liquid-like light. In the center, a large sphere floated, pulsating slowly. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Ryan stopped in his tracks. "Is that it?" he asked. "The core?" Sarah nodded, her breathing shallow. "That's it." But as they stepped closer, a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber. It wasn't a spoken voice. It was a voice that echoed inside their minds. "You should not have come," the voice said. A figure emerged from the light. It was tall, featureless, and radiated a cold, oppressive presence. Ryan knew immediately who it was. The Cethary Queen. She didn't move, but her presence felt like a mountain pressing down on them. "You bring a memory weapon to my domain," the voice said. "You think this will stop us?" Ryan raised the last arrow, his hand shaking. "It's not just a weapon," he said. "It's everything you hate. Everything you don't understand." The Queen tilted her head slightly. "Emotion. Weakness." "No," Ryan said firmly. "It's strength." The Queen raised a hand, and the air around them began to distort. Ryan felt his body grow heavy, as if gravity itself had turned against him. Sarah cried out and fell to her knees. Ryan turned to her, panic in his voice. "Sarah, get up." But she was clutching her chest, her eyes wide with pain. "It's pulling me," she gasped. "The core, it's trying to take me." The arrow's glow began to flicker. Ryan knew they didn't have much time. "Hold on," he said. "Just hold on." He turned back to the queen. "If you want this weapon, you'll have to take it from me." The queen's voice was calm, almost amused. "I do not need to take it. I only need to destroy you." The arrow's truth. The chamber was alive. The Xitheri queen's presence made every surface pulse and twist, as though the ship itself were a living creature reacting to her will. The glowing sphere at the chamber's center flickered with an ominous dark light. Ryan stood firm, his heart pounding. In his hands, the last arrow seemed to hum, almost as if it were alive too. Sarah was still on the floor, her breathing shallow, her body trembling. "Let her go," Ryan shouted, his voice echoing in the strange, pulsing space. The queen didn't move. Her featureless, dark form remained still, yet her voice filled the chamber. "She is no longer yours. She is ours now." Ryan clenched his fists, his grip on the arrow tightening. "She's not yours. She's not anyone's." The queen's voice turned colder. "You do not understand. She was created by your kind, but she belongs to us. She carries the flaw that you call emotion. We will erase it, as we erase all imperfections." The scientist's revelation. Before Ryan could react, another voice entered the chamber. It was weaker, human, and filled with years of regret. "You still don't understand them," the voice said. "And that is why you'll fail." Ryan turned sharply to see the old man, Sarah's creator, the scientist who had built the arrow, step into the light. His face was pale, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He leaned on the wall for support, yet there was a fire in his gaze that hadn't dimmed. The queen didn't turn, but her voice became harsher. You are the one who betrayed us, who created this abomination." The scientist gave a tired laugh. "I created her because you wouldn't listen, because you refuse to feel. You see emotions as a weakness. You call humanity flawed, but you're wrong." He turned to Ryan, his expression softening. "Ryan, you have to understand something about the arrow. It's not just a weapon. It's a bridge." "A bridge?" Ryan asked, his hand still tight on the glowing arrow. "What do you mean?" The scientist stepped closer, careful not to draw too much attention from the queen. "The arrow wasn't designed to destroy the Xitheri. It was designed to connect with them, to show them what it means to be human. Our feelings, our memories, our pain, our love, everything they shut out." "But she said it requires a choice," Ryan said, glancing at Sarah, who was struggling to sit up. "A choice only I can make. Why me?" The scientist hesitated, then said, "Because you still have hope. You haven't given up. And that hope is what makes us stronger than they'll ever be." The queen's warning. The queen's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Your hope is meaningless. Your feelings are noise. They only cloud your judgment and make you weak." Her form began to shift, growing larger, darker. The chamber quaked as she drew closer to Ryan and the scientist. "The arrow will not change us," she said, her tone resolute. "We have lived without emotion for eons. We have thrived without your weakness. You cannot infect us." Ryan took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. He had no idea what to do. The arrow was in his hands, glowing faintly. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the queen was right? Then he felt Sarah's hand on his arm. She had managed to stand, though she was still shaky. Her golden skin glowed faintly, almost like the arrow itself. She met his gaze, her voice quiet but strong. "Don't listen to her. You can do this. A choice is made." Ryan looked at the arrow, then back at the queen. "If this is a bridge," he said, "then why hasn't it worked yet? Why do we still have to fight?" The scientist answered, his voice heavy. "Because to complete the connection, it needs something powerful. A memory strong enough to break through their walls, to open their minds. A memory that can't be denied. Ryan frowned. What kind of memory? The scientist's expression turned sorrowful. A memory of loss, of sacrifice, something that shows the true strength of what it means to be human. Ryan's grip on the arrow tightened. He thought about everything he'd been through. The years of fighting. The people he had lost. The fear that had followed him every day of his life. And then he thought of Sarah. He turned to her, his voice unsteady. If it needs a strong memory, then what happens to me? She looked at him, her golden eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't name. It will hurt, she said, but you can handle it. The scientist added softly, you won't lose the memory, but it will become part of the arrow. It will change you. Ryan hesitated, then took a deep breath. Okay. The arrow's power unleashed. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory he would give. It wasn't a memory of victory. It wasn't a memory of triumph. It was a memory of a friend he had lost long ago. A comrade who had saved his life during the early days of the war. Someone who had given everything so that Ryan could keep fighting. The memory was raw. It burned in his chest. But it was also full of meaning, full of love. As the memory poured into the arrow, it began to glow brighter. The chamber was filled with a brilliant, warm light. The queen recoiled slightly, her form flickering. The pulsing walls around them slowed, as if confused by the surge of emotion. The scientist stepped back, shielding his eyes. It's working, he said. You're showing her what she's never known. The queen's voice was no longer steady. What is this? What are you doing? Ryan opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. I'm showing you what we are. The arrow shone like a small sun, and in that moment, the room was filled with images, not just Ryan's memory, but countless others. Moments of love, loss, hope, and determination. The essence of humanity, laid bare. The queen's reaction. The queen cried out, her form twisting and breaking apart. For the first time, her voice was not cold or commanding. It was afraid. No, she shouted. I see. I see it now. She fell to her knees, her body rippling like water. The light from the arrow grew even brighter, enveloping the entire chamber. And then, with a final, shattering cry, the queen vanished. The chamber fell silent. The pulsing stopped. The glowing sphere dimmed, no longer threatening. Ryan stood in the center of it all, the arrow now cool and still in his hands. Sarah was at his side, her expression one of awe and relief. You did it, she whispered. Fire in the heart. The chamber was silent now. The light from the arrow had faded, leaving behind a stillness that felt both eerie and profound. The walls no longer pulsed. The massive sphere at the room's center hung dim and lifeless, as if its energy had been drained. The Kthathari queen was gone, her form dissolved, her voice silenced. For the first time in years, Ryan felt a flicker of hope. Sarah stood next to him, her breathing still uneven. Her golden skin glimmered faintly, reflecting the dim glow of the chamber's walls. She placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, her touch steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. It's over, she said softly. Ryan looked at the arrow in his hands. It no longer hummed or pulsed. The warmth it once carried had vanished. It felt heavy now, a silent reminder of what had just occurred. Is it? He asked quietly, his voice filled with doubt. Before Sarah could answer, a low rumble shook the floor beneath them. The sphere in the chamber's center began to glow again, but this time it was different. The light was dark, flickering like a dying fire. And then came the voice. Not the queen's voice, but something deeper, older. It echoed through their minds, cold and merciless. You think you have won, it said. But this is only the beginning. A new threat. Ryan and Sarah exchanged a glance. The voice continued, growing louder. The queen was merely a vessel, a fragment of what we are. You have destroyed one piece, but the core remains. And now, you will pay the price for your defiance." The sphere cracked, and from within it emerged a shape, formless at first, then solidifying into something monstrous. It was larger than the queen, its body a swirling mass of shadows and light. Its presence filled the chamber, pushing down on Ryan and Sarah like a crushing weight. "What is that?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with fear. The old scientist, who had been standing quietly behind them, stepped forward. His face was pale, his expression grim. "That," he said slowly, "is the heart of the Setheri, the source of their power. It's what controls them." "How do we stop it?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The scientist hesitated. "I don't know. The arrow was meant to connect, to show them what it means to feel. But this is something beyond any single mind. It's the collective will of their entire race." The entity's voice boomed again. "You cannot stop us. We are eternal. We are the void. And you are nothing. The sacrifice." As the entity spoke, the chamber began to collapse. The walls cracked, and pieces of the ceiling fell, sending sparks and debris flying. Ryan held onto the arrow, his mind racing. He had no idea what to do. They had used the arrow's power. They had done what they were supposed to do. And yet it wasn't enough. Sarah stepped forward, her golden skin glowing brighter than before. She turned to Ryan, her expression calm and resolute. "Ryan," she said, "it's not over yet." He shook his head. "We already used the arrow. It doesn't have any power left." "It still has me," Sarah said quietly. Ryan's heart sank. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, a bittersweet expression that made Ryan's stomach twist. "The arrow connects to the strongest memory, the strongest emotion. It needs one final piece, a part of me that only I can give." The scientist's eyes widened. "Sarah, no, you can't. You'll—" She cut him off. "I was created for this. I exist because you hope that Setheri could change. And maybe they can't. Maybe this will fail. But if there's even a chance, I have to try." "Sarah, don't do this," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "We'll find another way." She turned to him, her eyes soft but unwavering. "There is no other way. You know that." Ryan felt his grip on the arrow tighten, his chest aching with a mix of anger and despair. He wanted to scream, to fight, to stop her. But deep down, he knew she was right. "You can't do this alone," he said finally. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not alone. You'll carry me. My memory will be in the arrow, just like all the others. Fire in the heart." The entity moved closer, its massive form blotting out what little light remained in the chamber. The ground beneath them began to give way, but Sarah stood firm. She reached out and placed her hand on the arrow, her golden light merging with its silver glow. "Remember me, Ryan," she said softly. "Remember who we are." Ryan felt a surge of warmth as her energy flowed into the arrow. It began to hum again, brighter and stronger than ever before. Sarah's form started to fade, her golden light becoming one with the weapon. The entity roared, sensing the shift in power. It lashed out with tendrils of darkness, but Ryan didn't move. He held the arrow steady, his tears falling freely. "Goodbye, Sarah," he whispered. And then, with all the strength he had left, he fired the arrow directly into the heart of the entity. The aftermath. The explosion was silent, but it was blinding. A wave of light and energy swept through the chamber, tearing apart the entity's form and flooding the entire ship. The walls crumbled, and the sphere disintegrated into ash. Ryan was thrown back by the force. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was gone. He was lying on a cold, metallic surface, surrounded by debris. The arrow was still in his hand, but it was no longer glowing. It was just a simple, silver object now. He sat up slowly, his body aching, his heart heavier than ever before. Sarah was gone. The scientist was nowhere to be seen. And the Exetheri ship was silent. The enemy had been defeated, but it didn't feel like a victory. Humanity survives. The silence was profound. Ryan sat alone on the cold metal floor, the shattered remains of the exethary core chamber surrounding him. The glow of the last arrow had faded, and the weapon now lay heavy and still in his hands. Its once brilliant surface seemed dull now, as if the life inside it had gone out. He felt hollow. For the first time since the war began, the constant hum of battle, the ever-present tension, was gone. There were no alarms, no distant rumble of explosions, no echoes of alien voices in his mind, only the faint, unsettling sound of his own breathing. Ryan slowly climbed to his feet, each movement a reminder of the toll the fight had taken on him. Every muscle ached, every joint felt strained. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. Sarah was gone. She had given everything, her strength, her spirit, her very essence, to make the arrow powerful enough to destroy the Xetheri's heart. She had become the light that ended the darkness, the bridge that connected a divided galaxy. And now, she was a memory. Ryan glanced around the chamber, half expecting to see her golden figure standing there, her faint smile reminding him that it wasn't truly over. But there was no one. The core was gone. The walls were cracked and lifeless. The ship was no longer the living, breathing monster it once was. He was alone. Returning to Skyhold. The journey back to Skyhold felt endless. The small craft he had found in the wrecked Exetheri ship was old and barely functional. The controls sparked, and the engines whined with every adjustment. Still, it moved through the vast emptiness of space, carrying him toward the only home he had left. When Skyhold finally appeared on the horizon, Ryan's heart clenched. The once proud floating station was barely recognizable. Whole sections of the structure were gone, and what remained looked fragile, like it was held together by sheer will rather than engineering. Fires burned faintly in the lower levels, and several smaller crafts buzzed around the station, attempting emergency repairs. As Ryan's ship approached, a voice crackled through the comm system. It was faint, distorted. "Unidentified vessel. State your identity." He hesitated, his voice hoarse. "It's Ryan Cade. I'm coming home." There was a long pause, followed by a broken reply. "Ryan? Ryan, you're alive. Oh, thank God. Come in, come in." The landing was rough. The small craft shuddered as it touched down in one of the few intact hangars. When the hatch opened, the cold air of the damaged station rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of burning metal and ozone. Ryan stepped out and was immediately met by familiar faces. Soldiers, engineers, even a few civilians, all weary and battered, gathered around him. Their eyes were wide, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. General Merrick pushed his way through the crowd, his usual stern demeanor softened by a rare look of emotion. "Ryan," Merrick said, his voice heavy. "What happened? Is it done?" Ryan nodded slowly. "The Queen is gone. The core is destroyed. The Xetheri, they're finished." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some laughed weakly, others cried. A few simply stood in stunned silence. "And Sarah?" Merrick asked, his tone careful. Ryan's gaze dropped. His throat tightened. She gave everything. She's gone." The silence that followed was heavier than anything he had felt on the battlefield. Merrick placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder and squeezed it briefly before turning to the others. "She made sure we'd survive," Merrick said. "And we will honor that sacrifice." Rebuilding the future. The days that followed were a blur. Skyhold was no longer a fortress. It was a salvage operation. The surviving engineers worked tirelessly to stabilize what was left of the station, patching holes, repairing life support systems, and ensuring that the remaining inhabitants could continue to live there safely. Medical teams treated the wounded, while supply crews ventured out to retrieve what resources they could from nearby debris fields. Ryan threw himself into the work. He helped where he could, lifting wreckage, assisting with repairs, delivering supplies. He didn't speak much, and the others didn't press him. They knew what he had lost. At night, when the work slowed and the station's remaining lights flickered dimly, he would find a quiet corner and sit with the arrow. He kept it close, though it no longer glowed or hummed. It was just an object now, a relic, but he couldn't let it go. He would run his fingers over its surface, as if hoping to feel the warmth it once carried, as if hoping to feel her presence again, a legacy of hope. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Skyhold began to change. What had once been a military outpost transformed into a new kind of home. The survivors planted the first small gardens in the rebuilt biodomes. Children, who had only known war, started attending lessons again. The sound of laughter returned, faint at first, then stronger as the days went by. Ryan watched it all with a quiet sense of pride. He had done his part. He had kept his promise to Sarah. Humanity was still here, and it was thriving. One evening, Merrick approached him as he sat on a bench overlooking the main repair bay. "You've done good, Ryan," Merrick said. "More than anyone could have asked for." Ryan shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was her. Sarah." Merrick nodded. "She believed in us. In you. And because of that, we have a chance now. A real chance to start over." Ryan looked down at the arrow in his hands. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like a part of him, a reminder of everything they had fought for. "We have a chance," he said quietly, "and we can't waste it. A bright tomorrow." The years ahead weren't easy. Rebuilding never was. But the survivors of Skyhold carried a new sense of purpose. They remembered the sacrifices made by those who came before them. They remembered Sarah's courage, Ryan's determination, and the countless lives that had been lost to secure their future. And slowly, hope returned. The gardens grew larger. The children grew older, stronger, braver. The people of Skyhold learned to work together, to trust one another, to lean on the very emotions that Exetheri had tried so hard to erase. Humanity survived not because of its weapons, but because of its heart, because of its memories, because of its willingness to hold on, no matter how difficult the struggle. Ryan remained a quiet figure in this new world, a reminder of the past and a guardian of the future. And though the arrow no longer glowed, it remained with him, a symbol of everything humanity had endured and everything it still had to give. In the end, it wasn't the last arrow that saved them. It was the fire in their hearts.